Welcome to the Bourbon Friday Show. We are talking business and bourbon. I am your host, Nick Niehaus, and I'm really excited because this is one of our special tasting episodes, which is a little bit different than normal. So I'm talking to Adam Stumpf, who is the owner and distiller at Stumpy Spirits. So Adam, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, excited to do this. So why don't we start with the important stuff? Let's get a pour here on the table so we all have something to sample.
Absolutely.
So tell us what we're trying first here today.
Yeah, so the first one we're going to try is our Old Monroe Bourbon. It is a single barrel bourbon, so every barrel or every bottle of bourbon you see is going to have a barrel number written on it. So this one particularly is barrel number 130.
Gotcha. All right. So what are we looking for in this one?
So this one is a 4-grain bourbon, but it is a higher rye content. So you'll get a lot of spice in there. It's got a really nice kind of soft, pleasant nose to it. Bit of heat throughout the palate, but nice and round on the back end.
Very cool.
We do it at 90 proof, so it's not like melt your mouth.
Yeah,
kind of
not too
hot.
crazy. Yeah, well, that's kind of the lower side. Normally Eric picks the bourbon every week,
Right.
and they range from 90 to 130 or something like that normally.
Depending on how interesting it's going to get.
Very rare that it gets into that, like, lowest it can get, that 80 range.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't mess around with the standard 80%, right?
Yeah, for
Why
sure.
is it so diluted?
Yeah,
Right.
well, it's fine. I mean, I'm not complaining about it, by all means. All right, well, let's give it a try here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow, it's good.
Yeah, so that one.
Yeah, so tell me, what am I looking for in the taste? Anything in particular?
So we're a 4-year-old distillery, and we do not source a single barrel of whiskey from another distillery. So the oldest barrel we have on site is 4 years old. It's barrel number 1, still sitting in the rick house. So this particular barrel is about 2 years old, so we can technically call it a straight bourbon. It's been in a barrel for 2 years. Early on, you're going to get the caramels and the vanillins and things that extract out of the wood very quickly. You still get a lot of the really nice grainy notes in there. Rye it's kind of like bread, honestly. Like rye bread is spicy and earthy, and it's going to contribute a lot of those same factors to a whiskey. So with the higher rye content being 20% here, you get those nice spicy notes, almost that black pepper that's kind of hangs on your tongue a little bit.
You definitely get the rye notes off the nose.
Yeah, right off the nose, much more so than a corn. I honestly feel like this one almost drinks a little bit more like a rye whiskey than it does a bourbon sometimes. This particular barrel does. You'll be surprised when we taste the next one, for sure.
Interesting. So what are you tasting, Eric? Anything stands out to you?
Well, I mean, it is a high rye bourbon. You can definitely tell that for sure. And like that spice is right there, and like I said, off the nose, that is what you smell, and it is almost like a rye, like you said, for sure. And then all your basic bourbon notes that you always get.
Yep.
Yeah.
The caramels, the vanillas, all that fun stuff. Surprisingly to me, so this one was aged in a 30-gallon barrel, so it kind of accelerates the barrel aging process a little bit, more surface area to liquid. But the legs on this glass, they're actually clinging quite well.
Yeah.
So part of that is because of the barrels we use. We don't use a standard whiskey barrel. First, we get the barrels toasted before they're charred. It's a little more expensive process for the cooper to do. They actually hold that barrel over an oak burning fire for about 30 minutes. And imagine it like a giant oak marshmallow. And they're just kind of getting the inside to turn color, get a lot of those sugars to caramelize, and then they'll flash char it real quick and give us that standard char over it. So as that whiskey's penetrating the wood, we can pull out more sugars and get the more viscous legs and a little longer flavor profile.
Cool. What led to you guys trying that out?
Just trying to differentiate ourselves.
Something different?
Yeah, absolutely. So barrels are responsible for probably 60% of an aged whiskey's finished character. Any little variant that you can do there, whether it's barrel entry proof or just the specs of the barrel itself, are definitely going to change a whiskey. So,
are you using the full-size barrels or smaller?
So we've started with smaller barrels. We started in 15-gallon barrels and then eventually stepped up to 30-gallon barrels, and we are now barreling in exclusively 53-gallon barrels. The target for the 53s, though, is 4 years, so we haven't released a single one of those. We're pretty well through all of our 15-gallon inventory and now into the 30-gallon inventory. Yep.
Very cool. Well, let's talk about the history of the company a little bit, right? So you just mentioned you're past the 4-year mark, so congrats. That's
thank
awesome.
you.
Yeah. It sounds like you're getting more and more demand as you grow. It sounds like things are very busy. So just tell me how you got started. Kind of where did the idea come from? How'd you get going? Yeah,
so it's a lot of little things that kind of added up to this one big thing, I guess, or big thing relative for us, right? For me, it kind of started at school. I went to school down in Rolla, Missouri. If you guys are familiar with Rolla. small town, South
Yeah,
Central
my dad
Missouri.
went there.
Yeah, not a lot to do other than drink in school. So we did our fair share of both. We were actually sitting around watching the Cardinals play one night, probably drinking either Pabst Blue Ribbon or Natty Light. That's all we could afford at the time, obviously.
Of course.
And the thought came up, and we were like, people have been making booze for tens of thousands of years. This cannot be that difficult. We have to try it. So there's some quick Google foo, told us how to make alcohol. We could get all this stuff at Walmart. So we drive down to the Rolla Walmart, and we bought honey. We bought a in refrigerator water tank, right, and some baker's yeast, and took it back to the house and threw the honey in, threw some warm water in, threw the yeast in, threw it under the counter, and let it ferment.
Okay.
I am pretty sure that there's better tasting prison hooch out there than what that's.
Yeah,
I mean, it's quite possibly
doesn't sound like it's gonna end well, but we'll see,
it is
right?
possibly the worst tasting thing I've ever made in my life.
I definitely know some people that did some experiments in college as well with that. And it's like, I don't want to drink that. Sorry.
No, absolutely not. So after that, being engineering students, we kind of nerded out on the making of alcohol, the process. So we made an automated brew stand that's actually in use at another local brewery right now as their pilot system. So kind of cool. But it would basically make our beer for us, and then we would sit there and drink the batch from before. So it was this beautiful circle of life for some college students.
You got it dialed in.
Yeah, exactly. So flash forward a couple years. After college, I went to Anheuser-Busch. I spent 4 years there. Everything from packaging to logistics to engineering, capital expenditure, that kind of stuff. And really, I guess, got a basis in alcohol production, right? Turning grain into alcohol. And that was my first full-time job. While at Anheuser-Busch, I went to Washington University and did my MBA there at night. So, I was working midnight shift at the brewery at that point in time, and I took class from 6 to 9, and then worked from 11 to 7. 6 p.m. to 9 p.m., then 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. So it was an interesting schedule.
Yeah.
People look really funny at you whenever you're at Hammerstone's at 7 in the morning drinking beer. Right. It's like, this is our evening, I promise.
Yeah, well, you and the nurses and stuff.
Yeah,
like that,
exactly.
A couple categories of folks. Right?
You got it. So, but while I was at WashU, there was an entrepreneurship course taught by David Poldoyan, who was a fantastic guy. And that was kind of the point in time where we started to develop this business plan for distillery. I always kind of had this idea of I wanted to do a craft brewery, but when we took a step back and looked at the overall beverage alcohol industry, what we saw was that, the craft brewing market was getting very saturated at that point in time.
Sure.
Not to say that there's a bubble or going to be a bubble or whatever, but it looked like craft distilling was basically where craft brewing was in the 90s at that point in time. Okay. So it was really interesting. And then the thing that led us to a distillery, and we almost couldn't convince ourselves to do it because, right, it's kind of a commodity-based business if you think about it, right? If you're buying equipment from one of a handful of manufacturers, grain from one of a handful of distributors, those things are both commodities kind of at that point, right? Yep. You've got two commodities really as your input. The artisanship really comes in whenever you're running the still and all that stuff.
Sure.
But there's only so much differentiation you can do with that, right? So what is the real value proposition of a craft whiskey? If I can go out and buy Henrique and a 10-year bottled in bond for $35, why am I going to pay $55, $60 a bottle for a 2-year-old bourbon that's craft and local?
Sure.
How far does that craft and local message go? So the thing we decided to do to really drive the value proposition and create value for our consumers was to build a single source distillery and really kind of take the Napa Valley approach to distilling and try to put the taste of a region inside our bottle.
Oh, okay.
So we decided to grow all of our own grains. So we grow our red corn, white corn, yellow corn, wheat, barley, and rye all on site. And every drop of alcohol that we put into a bottle gets made from those grains that we grow on our farm.
Really?
So that's more or less the major events that kind of added up to starting the distillery.
Very cool. Yeah, that's interesting. I think I'm really interested now, obviously, as we've done the show for a couple of years, in this kind of craft scene, and realizing how maybe high the ceiling really is. You know, like you mentioned, this is kind of where we were at, 20 years ago or so with craft beer. So.
Absolutely. The interesting thing to me is craft spirits right now account for, maybe at the top end 3% of all dollars in volume.
Yeah.
The rest of the 97% is controlled by maybe a dozen different companies.
Wow. Okay.
That bottom 3% is incredibly fragmented, probably close to 2,000 small distilleries at this point in that bottom 3%. So if you talk about the disparity there, there's nothing but run room, I feel like.
Sure.
The thing that's a challenge is, as craft distillers, we have to remember that we're not in competition with other craft distillers, right? It's kind of a customer sharing situation because if somebody's interested in trying something crazy of mine, they're interested in trying something crazy of Dave's or Gary's from anything like that. So getting consumers to understand what the difference is between these craft brands and the large brands that you see on the shelf, Jim Beam White, Tito's, all these different things that have been there forever. That's the big challenge in the industry right now, honestly.
Gotcha. Certainly from, at least from a bourbon drinker's standpoint or any kind of whiskey, really, when you're talking about craft, a lot of times what we're just seeking is that novelty. We want to try the newest thing, or what do you have that's different than everything else? And Absolutely. That's really what you want. And that's where craft is killing it.
Yes, absolutely.
Cool. Well, along those lines, maybe we should try our second one now.
Sure.
Got to keep it moving, right?
Right. So this is barrel number 135.
Okay. Now, is this the same bourbon, or what are the differences?
It is. So this, on the shelf, if you go into Chinook's, Total Wine, Randall's, wherever, this is going to be the same facing.
Okay.
So like I said, every bottle of bourbon that we do is a single barrel. This is barrel number 135. So 5 barrels down the registry from the last bourbon that we tried, and it is completely different.
So this will really give us a sense of, so what was different? Was it a different kind of barrel that it went into, or what are we looking for?
Similar barrel profile, similar barrel entry proof, different mash bill.
Gotcha.
So we use different grains to make this. So it is a 4-grain bourbon still. So all the same grains were used to make this. We just kind of chopped up those denominations a little bit.
Okay.
This is higher corn and higher wheat, and we back the rye way back. So this really only has about half of the rye content that barrel number 130 did.
Gotcha.
You're going to notice it's a completely different bourbon.
Fair enough. All right, let's give it a try.
Right off the nose.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Different mouthfeel entirely.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
Completely different. So
you can definitely notice the less rye in there.
Yeah.
Less spiciness to it.
Yeah. Absolutely. So yeah, this is down at about 10 or 11% rye,
okay.
Which if you think of your big bourbons that are on the market, the ones that's going to be comparable to rye content wise, that's like the Buffalo Trace standard mash bill and those types of things. But it is a 4-grain, so it's a little bit different. And I grabbed this right out of the bottling tank, so it hasn't been filtered yet. So you get a little bit of haze in there. You get some big flavors.
All right.
We dumped this barrel, this afternoon. So what we will do,
new stuff. I
yeah,
like
exactly.
It.
So
exclusive.
Yeah, exclusive to here. That is it right now. This is going to have to sit in that tank for about 24 to 48 hours, and we'll let it breathe. So what we've noticed is when we dump a barrel, we don't bottle it right away because, like if you smell this, there's a little bit of alcohol that you get right off the nose. That fades if you let that sit for about 24 to 48 hours and just kind of oxidize.
Okay.
Let some of those alcohol vapors escape and all that fun stuff. So it's kind of like, if you pour a glass of bourbon, let it sit here for 15 minutes, you come back, and it's completely different. Same principle.
Very interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I want to go back to something you said a second ago about the fact that 3% of the market is all of these tiny companies, and then everybody else is these really big guys.
Sure.
You've taken the path of trying to, like you said, distill kind of the flavor of a particular region and area everything's grown and produced in that spot. What are the techniques that you see other distillers doing to kind of differentiate themselves? Is that a trend, or what are other things that are different from maybe the craft distillers versus the big guys?
Yeah, absolutely. So you see a lot of differentiation in grains.
Okay.
You see heirloom grains, you see like spelt, millet, and just these ancient grains that the big guys aren't using, right? The big guys stick to mostly corn, rye, and barley malt. That's generally a standard bourbon.
Sure.
And then you get your wheated bourbons as well, Weller, Pappy, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So differentiating outside of that is a big deal. Differentiating on barrel entry proofs. So obviously the large companies are very concerned about profit margins.
Sure.
Legally, they can barrel whiskey at up to 125 proof, and generally most of them do, right? You get the most alcohol in a barrel at that point in time.
Mm-hmm.
Legally, you can barrel bourbon as low as 80 proof. You see a lot of big bourbons and Tennessee whiskey, which is, let's be honest, a bourbon, at 80 proof, right?
Yeah, sure.
So how do you get from 125 to 80? You add water. Water's cheap. So the thing you're doing, though, is you're diluting away that character that you've worked so hard to put into that whiskey.
Sure.
So you see a lot of guys taking different approaches to barrel entry, lower barrel entry proofs. Kentucky Peerless is a beautiful example and a pioneer in the industry, or champion in the industry for it at least. They barrel their whiskey to 107 proof. And I think you see a lot of distillers taking that, they call it kind of the pre-prohibition approach to barreling. because prior to Prohibition, saloon owners would go in and they would fill a jug up right out of the barrel, and that was the whiskey. So, if you barrel at 107 proof, say that whiskey might be at 109 proof after 2 or 3 years. That's much more palatable than something that's barreled at 125 and is like Stag Junior at like 139 proof after a few years or something crazy like that. So.
Don't tempt Eric. He's gonna go find that and bring it.
If I could find a bottle.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And then you see, innovations in barrels as well. You see a lot of guys buying groove stave or wave stave barrels, barrels that have more surface area per liquid in a 53-gallon barrel, different toasting and charring options, just basically any variable that can be introduced into the product prior to it going in the bottle is where craft is playing right now. So it's.
Gotcha.
I mean, I know it's like the vaguest answer, like anything's possible, but that's really what the industry's doing right now.
And I love it.
That's what's cool about it. Yeah, so you're getting so many options to experiment with things that sounds like the big guys avoid even messing with, because the whole point is to have the same flavor every single time.
Absolutely, yeah. And, I mean, the nice thing is, if you have a project that goes bad, you can just dump it in the distill it over 190 proof, and poof, it's vodka. So we're good to go.
Fair enough. Yeah, you guys got a backup plan, I guess, right? All right, very cool. Well, Eric, I didn't have a chance to ask you what you thought of the second one here. Notice any differences in particular than the rye?
Well, I mean, Adam basically said.
Well, I know. I just started there.
It's all right. And I don't necessarily consider myself to have the greatest palate in the world by any stretch of the imagination. But yeah, it certainly is a much more wheated bourbon, and that mouthfeel is really quite different between the two.
Much. Wheat is kind of, so they call, like, corn is like your alcohol producing mechanism within a bourbon, right? And then most distillers traditionally have called wheat, barley, and rye the flavoring grains. So these different combinations of flavoring grains really change a bourbon's profile. Wheat predominantly is very soft and mellow, so you get those more delicate notes that come through, even on the nose. But it tends to let other things shine through, so you'll get more of the corn and more of the barrel, that kind of thing.
Very cool.
I'm gonna taste here real quick.